The sun had barely risen over the hills when the village of Entembes stirred to life.
Roosters crowed in the distance, children's laughter echoed faintly from the riverbank, and smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of small, worn-out huts. Life here was simple, harsh but familiar. The people of Ntembe knew hardship like an old friend, but they carried it with grace. Among the modest homes, one stood out, not for its beauty, but for the warmth that always seemed to pour from its walls. It belonged to Grace and Daniel, a couple who had been together since their teenage years. They were known in the village not for wealth or power, but for their love, and for the 4 children that ran around their home, filling it with laughter and dreams far too big for their crumbling walls.
Grace had married Daniel out of love. Not convenience, not pressure. Love.
She had stood beside him when his crops failed, when his small carpentry business barely fed them, and when the village gossiped about their empty cupboards. She bore each of their 4 children with her own hands, refusing help even when her body was weak. And Daniel, at least once upon a time, was just as devoted. He had promised her the world, even if all he had was dirt in his pockets. But promises are cheap when the hunger is real. By the time their youngest daughter turned 2, the cracks in their fairy tale had deepened. The small field Daniel worked had dried from the drought, and their home was falling apart plank by plank. Grace did everything she could, weaving baskets, washing clothes for the neighbors, selling roasted cassava by the roadside. Still, they were barely surviving. Daniel, once proud and strong, had grown bitter. The pressure of poverty chewed through his spirit. He began to avoid home, returning late, sometimes drunk, blaming Grace for their misfortunes. And yet she endured.
For the children. For the dream. Until she arrived.
One hot afternoon, a strange car, sleek, black and foreign to the dusty roads of Ntembe, pulled up in front of the village well. The engine purred like a predator surveying prey. From inside stepped a woman in a crimson dress and high heels that sank awkwardly into the dirt. Her skin was pale and polished, her nails long and painted, and on her wrist hung a gold bracelet that shimmered like magic under the sun.
The villagers whispered. They watched.
Her name was Madame Veronica. No one knew where she came from, but the rumor spread like wildfire. She was rich, connected, and childless.
And lonely.
She stayed at the village guest house, but she walked the paths daily, always stopping by Daniel's workshop, praising his craftsmanship, slipping money into his hand. At first, Grace said nothing.
She trusted Daniel.
She believed in the vows they made under the tree beside the river, where they carved their names into bark like foolish children in love.
But then Daniel stopped coming home.
Some nights he would return with cologne lingering on his collar. Other nights, not at all. Grace's heart twisted, but she said nothing. Not until one morning when Daniel stood at their door, his bags packed, his eyes cold, and said words she would never forget.
I can't live like this anymore. I deserve better.
He didn't say goodbye to the children.
He didn't look back.
Grace collapsed to the ground that night, sobbing so hard the neighbors thought someone had died.
In a way, someone had.
The man she married was gone, replaced by a stranger with a shiny watch and empty eyes. In the days that followed, Grace became the village's silent sorrow. Some pitied her, others mocked her, whispering about her not being enough. But what they didn't know was that beneath her trembling hands and tear-soaked pillow, something inside her had awakened.
She had 4 mouths to feed.
And she refused to let them starve because a man chose gold over blood. Grace worked like no woman the village had ever seen. By dawn, she was up baking bread to sell at the market. By noon, she fetched water for the elderly in exchange for coins. By night, she stitched clothes under a dim lantern, her children asleep beside her. The villagers watched. And slowly, their pity turned into admiration.
1 year passed. Then 2. Then 5. Grace's children grew.
They wore second-hand shoes but carried heads held high. Grace taught them honesty, humility, and strength. She never spoke ill of Daniel, though his name was barely mentioned in the house. His betrayal was a scar, but not a prison. Meanwhile, far from the village, Daniel's fairy tale began to unravel. Living with Madame Veronica had seemed like paradise at first. New clothes, fine food, air-conditioned rooms. But Veronica wasn't just lonely. She was possessive.
Controlling. demanding.
Daniel, who once walked freely among trees, now lived like a bird in a golden cage. Then came the bankruptcy. Veronica's business collapsed after a scandal involving bribes and fraud. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her properties seized. She fled the country, leaving Daniel alone, broke and in debt. He returned to Ntembe, not in a black car this time, but on foot with a dusty bag and shoes falling apart. That same evening, the village square buzzed with noise. A convoy of luxury SUVs rolled in, their windows tinted, tires spotless. Children ran behind them in wonder, and elders stood with eyes wide.
The doors opened.
Out stepped a woman in a tailored white suit, sunglasses shading her eyes, and heels that clicked with confidence on the cement. She looked familiar. But no one could believe it.
It was Grace.
But not the Grace they remembered. This Grace wore elegance like a second skin. Her posture was regal, her smile calm but unreadable. Her children followed, now tall, educated, and confident. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said everything. The whispers began before she even reached her old home.
Is that? It can't be. She's rich now. How?
Daniel, standing near the well where he once kissed her hands and swore forever, could barely breathe. He stepped forward, shaking, clutching the old bag on his shoulder.
His voice cracked. Grace, I came to say. I was wrong.
She turned slowly, meeting his eyes with a calm so sharp it could cut glass. But she said nothing.
Not yet.
And then, a boy ran out from the crowd, a child no older than 8, with eyes that mirrored Grace's.
He hugged her tightly. Mama, wie sleeping hier nicht. Ze will jagas froze.
Whispers turned into questions. Grace smiled, knelt down, and whispered something in the child's ear. Then she stood up, her eyes scanning the crowd, pausing briefly on Daniel. And then she spoke, for the first time in years.
Leze past stay burit.
I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to give, but not to the ungrateful.
Ze tickend.
Because that night, a letter was found, a sealed envelope on the church door with Grace's signature. Inside was a note that said, I never left empty-handed. The envelope on the church door became the talk of the village for days. People gathered around it, reading and rereading Grace's handwritten message like it was a prophecy. I never left empty-handed.
What did she mean? Was it about money? About our child? About revenge?
Everyone had a theory, and none of them were comforting. One thing was clear: Grace had returned not only wealthier, but wiser, more composed, and more powerful than anyone expected. And she was no longer the tearful woman begging her husband to stay. That night, Grace stayed in the old house where she once lived with Daniel. It had been abandoned for years, the roof partially collapsed, the walls eaten by termites, and the air heavy with memories. She sat in the same corner where she once nursed her youngest child and cried into her hands. But now, she wasn't crying. She was remembering. And she wasn't alone. The little boy, the one who called her mama, was asleep beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. His name was Elijah. And he wasn't just any child. He was Daniel's son, born just a few months after he left her. Yes. Grace had been pregnant when Daniel walked out. But she never told him. She had chosen silence. Not out of spite, but out of strength. She knew Daniel had made his choice. And she refused to beg him to stay because of duty. So she raised Elijah alone, with more love than the world could contain. And now, the boy was the key to everything.
The next morning, Grace Walke trug ze Viljage like a queen with no crown. People cleared paths for her.
Some bowed their heads. Others tried to start small talk, but her presence demanded silence more than conversation. She headed straight to the chief's compound, not to seek approval, but to give a gift. Chief Obaid was old, wise, and not easily impressed. But when Grace handed him a document wrapped in golden cloth, his eyes widened. It was a deed of donation. Grace had purchased 50 hectares of land on the edge of the village, and she was donating it for a community school and health center, fully funded. Let no child in Ntembe go without books or medicine again, she said calmly. I've walked through fire. Now, I want to light a path. The villagers gasped.
Who was this woman?
How did she go from washing clothes for pennies to becoming a benefactor with millions? The answer lay not in what she gained, but in what she endured. 10 years earlier. After Daniel left, Grace took her 4 children and Elijah, still unborn, and walked to the nearby city of Kinshasa. She had no money, no connections, and no plan. But she had grit. She found shelter in a church basement, worked cleaning offices during the day, and sold vegetables in the evening. When Elijah was born, she wrapped him in old blankets and tied him to her back, continuing work without pause. Then one day her life changed, because of a forgotten kindness. Years ago, Grace had nursed a sick girl who fainted by the riverside near their village. She had no idea the girl's father was Chief Engineer Nwosu, a powerful man in the capital. By coincidence, or perhaps fate, Nwosu's car broke down near the Kinshasa market where Grace was selling cassava. He recognized her instantly. You're the one who saved my daughter," he whispered. Grace nodded, confused. The man got out of his car and embraced her.
I've searched for you for years.
Within a month, Grace had a job managing one of Nwosu's food distribution warehouses. Within a year, she had saved enough to start her own. And within 5 years, she owned 3 food factories across the country.
Shebuilt everything in the lengse. No social media.
No newspaper interviews.
Just results.
Because while the world forgot her, she had remembered everything.
Back in the village.
Daniel watched from a distance as Grace moved through the crowd like someone who had never tasted poverty. His pride kept him from speaking. But inside, he was drowning. His debts had followed him back. He had no land, no work, and no one willing to offer help. Everyone respected Grace now, and no one wanted to be seen siding with the man who once humiliated her. Late one evening, he stood outside her home.
The lights were on.
Laughter echoed from inside. Grace's children, including Elijah, were gathered around her, listening to her read a story.
Daniel's heart broke.
That was supposed to be his family.
He knocked, hesitantly. The door opened.
Grace stood there, expression unreadable.
Grace.
I just wanted to see the boy.
Elia.
She looked at him for a long time. Then, in a tone as gentle as it was firm, she said, "He's not a prize, Daniel.
He's a child.
And you're not entitled to him just because of blood." Daniel fell to his knees. "I've lost everything," he sobbed.
"Please. I don't want your money.
I just want to be a father again." Grace stepped out, closed the door gently behind her, and sat beside him on the step.
You wanted better, remember? She said softly.
You said I wasn't enough. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "And yet here I am," she continued, "raising our children with dignity, while you ran away from the fire we built together." There was no anger in her voice, only truth.
After a long pause, she looked at him.
"Elijah will know you, when he's ready. But don't expect him to love a ghost." And with that she stood, walked back inside, and closed the door.
The Village Festival.
A month later, the village held its annual festival, this time with a grand addition, the groundbreaking ceremony of the new school, funded by Grace. Hundreds gathered. Grace was seated beside the chief, her children around her. Even Elijah, now aware of the truth about his father, held her hand tightly. Daniel stood in the crowd, uninvited, but silent. When Grace was called to speak, the crowd fell silent. She stepped forward, microphone in hand, eyes scanning the village that once watched her fall. 10 years ago, I was left with nothing, not even dignity.
I was broken, betrayed, alone. But I rose.
Not because I had power, but because I had purpose. Today, I return not to boast, but to build. Not to shame, but to show that those you cast aside may one day hold the keys to your future. To every woman left behind, every child laughed at, every soul dismissed as poor, remember this. Your worth is not defined by who walks away, but by what you choose to become when they do. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even the elders wiped tears. But Daniel, he could not clap. He could only lower his head and whisper to himself.
I never kne wat I hat, until I lost it forever.
The festival had ended. But its echoes remained, not just in song or cheer, but in the whispers, the stolen glances, the questions. Who was Grace now? And more importantly, what else hadn't she told them? Because something about her return still didn't add up. Yes, she was generous. Yes, she had become successful beyond belief. But behind her eyes was something deeper than triumph.
Something haunted.
And it was about to surface. That night, as Grace sat alone on the porch of her newly renovated childhood home, her eldest daughter Miriam approached quietly. "Mama," she said, "there's something you should know." Grace looked up. Miriam was 17 now, tall, poised, and as wise as her mother. She had grown into a protector for her younger siblings, especially Elijah. "I overheard Daniel," Miriam continued. "He was speaking with Uncle Kofi. He said he thinks Elijah isn't his son."
Grace froze. "He said the dates don't add up.
"That maybe you were with someone else before he left. That's why you never told him."
A long silence passed.
Grace didn't blink.
Didn't flinch.
Instead, she said something Miriam wasn't expecting.
"He's right."
Miriam gasped.
"What?"
"Elijah isn't his son."
The truth spilled out, raw and quiet. "When your Vater left, I was 5 months pregnant. I thought he knew."
But he didn't even look back long enough to ask.
"I reiset you also same."
But 6 months after Elijah was born, I met someone. Miriam's breath caught in her throat.
A man named David. He was kind.
He was a friend of Engineer Nwosu.
He helped us survive. Not just with money, with dignity. But he had a wife. A family.
Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I never asked for love. I just wanted safety. And for a while, I believed he could give that to us. But then, one day, he disappeared. Died in a plane crash. No goodbye. No will. Just gone." She sighed. "I didn't plan to have Elijah. But when I held him, I knew. He was mine. Ours. And maybe, he was the only good thing that came from all that pain." Miriam sat down beside her mother, speechless. "You told the village he's Daniel's," she finally said. "I let them believe what they wanted," Grace whispered. "Not because I wanted to lie, but because the truth would have destroyed more than it saved. And honestly, I was tired." The next day, news spreads fast in villages. And secrets? They never stay secrets for long. By morning someone, perhaps Uncle Kofi, had told the elders what Daniel suspected. And just like that, Elijah became the center of a storm. "He's not even Daniel's blood? Then what is he doing here? Grace has deceived us all." Whispers became questions. Questions became judgments. And judgments turned into something worse, threats. That afternoon, as Grace arrived at the village square for a community meeting about the school project, she found a small crowd already gathered, tense, cold, eyes sharp. Chief Obaid stood at the front, holding a letter in his hand. "We've received a formal complaint," he said gravely. "Your son Elijah, there are claims he was fathered out of wedlock by a married man, that he is not a rightful heir to this land." The word bastard wasn't spoken, but it hung in the air like poison. Grace stood tall. "And what does that have to do with his education?
Or the school?
Or the future of this village?"
Murmurs.
One of the elders, Elder Ruto, stepped forward. "Grace, you have done well. But honor matters here. Bloodlines matter. We cannot accept a child born in."
"Enough," Grace interrupted.
Her voice was calm, but cut like a blade.
"You care about honor?
Where was honor when Daniel abandoned 5 children without food? Where was honor when you all watched me starve and turned away? Where was honor when I sold roasted corn at the city gates while pregnant, barefoot, humiliated, alone?"
Silence.
"You say Elijah doesn't deserve to stand on this land. But I ask you, what makes a man a son of the soil?
Blut? Or belonging? DNA? Or destiny?" No one answered. She stepped forward, voice rising. "My son has never stolen. Never cursed.
Never disrespected a soul in this village. He speaks better than your chiefs. Reads faster than your scribes.
And dreams bigger than your fears.
She pointed at her chest.
If bloot defines wörs, ten take your land back. Il build my school some wäre Else.
But if character defines it, then Elijah belongs more than any of you ever will. Applause broke out, timid at first, then thunderous. Even Chief Obed nodded slowly. Let it be known, he declared, that from this day forward, Elijah is a son of Temb. His mother has earned it for him with every drop of sweat and every tear she shed. And no man, dead or living, will rewrite that.
That night, Daniel came to Grace again. This time, he didn't knock.
He waited at the gate like a shadow. When Grace walked out to meet him, he was already crying. I just wanted to believe he was mine, Daniel whispered. Even after everything.
I hoped.
Grace didn't respond. Daniel dropped to his knees.
I'm sorry I left you.
I was stupid. I was selfish. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but if you can give it, even a little. Grace looked down at him. Then, with a voice so soft it nearly broke the wind, she said, Forgiveness isn't for you, Daniel.
It's for me.
And I gave it, long ago.
Daniel sobbed harder. And Elijah? He asked. Grace sighed.
You want him to know you? Then earn it. Don't cry on your knees.
Stand up. Show up. And don't disappear when it gets hard. Daniel nodded. I will.
For his sake, I hope so, Grace said. Then she turned and walked back inside, where her son was waiting, and where a future she had built with her bare hands finally felt secure. But just as peace returned,
a letter arrived.
Miriam brought it to Grace, sealed in black wax with a golden crest. Grace stared at it for a long time before opening it.
Inside, a single sentence.
You were never supposed to find the account.
No Name. No Signature.
Just that line, cryptic, chilling, and dangerously specific. Grace's heart dropped. Because she knew exactly what it meant. Grace stared at the letter again. You were never supposed to find the account.
Her hands trembled.
The wind around her seemed to still. Only one person could have written this. Only one man had the arrogance to speak in riddles and threats. And he was supposed to be dead.
David Owusu. 10 years ago.
She hadn't told anyone the full truth. Not even Miriam. Not even her closest friend, Amaka. After Daniel had left and she was raising 5 children alone, the only thing keeping her sane was her will to survive. That was when she met David, a business tycoon from Accra who was married, powerful, and impossibly charming. He was also broken.
He claimed to love her.
Claimed he was trapped in a loveless marriage with a wife who only cared about his money.
He visited once a month.
Left envelopes filled with cash. Called her his safe place.
And Grace? She believed him.
Until she got pregnant with Elijah. He never knew. Before she could tell him, he died in a plane crash off the coast of Nigeria.
Or so she thought.
2 years later, when she was struggling in the city, she received an anonymous tip. Check the old mining account.
What meaning account?
She followed the lead and discovered a dormant bank account in Ghana, under her name. A name she never registered. It had $4 million US dollars in it.
No explanation. No paperwork.
Just an offshore deposit slip, with a code phrase only David used.
The girl who sells hope deserves a kingdom. It was him.
She cried for hours that day.
Grieved again.
Confused, overwhelmed, terrified. She used some of the money to raise her children, fund small businesses, and disappear into the system under a different identity. One that could never be traced back to Grace Addo, the abandoned wife from Temb. And now, someone had found her. Present day, the letter was just the beginning. That same afternoon, a black luxury sedan pulled up near the school construction site.
It bore no plates.
A man in a dark gray suit stepped out, tall and rigid like a soldier. He handed Grace an envelope and said just one thing. My boss would like to see you.
Tomorrow. Lagos.
Or everything changes. Then he got back into the car and drove off. Grace opened the second envelope. Inside was a photo
of David Alive,
sitting in what looked like a mansion.
older now, but unmistakably him. The photo was time-stamped, 2 weeks ago. She had to go.
That night, Grace packed a small bag. Miriam begged her not to. Elijah just started sleeping through the night again, she said.
Mama, please.
You don't know what this man wants.
I do, Grace said. He wants power.
And he never gives anything without asking for something bigger.
Ten don't go.
Grace turned to her daughter, cupped her face gently.
Baby, if I don't go, he won't stop. Not with me.
Not with Elijah. This is a man who faked his death to escape enemies. If he's coming out of hiding, it's not for nothing.
Lagos, the Konfrontation.
Grace arrived at the private estate at sunset.
Amit Quarz Patroleze geht's.
Cameras tracked her every step. Inside, a servant led her to a marble foyer, then into a sunlit room with high windows.
And there he was. David Owusu. Alive.
Wearing a crisp white shirt. Drinking orange tea. As if nothing had happened.
He looked up and smiled. Grace, he said.
You've aged beautifully. Grace didn't return the smile. You're supposed to be dead.
He sipped his tea.
That's what the world believes. And I prefer it that way.
VHY Kohl ME now.
David stood and walked slowly toward her, like a predator circling its prey.
Because I gave you so meeting, Grace. So meeting big.
That account wasn't just money.
It was an exit. A back door. And now. He leaned closer. I need it back. Grace's heart thudded. It's gone, Shelit. I spent it all.
David's eyes twitched, just slightly.
Don't insult me, he whispered.
I know you used only part of it. The rest is in holding accounts. Some even tied to Elijah's future trust. You think I don't watch?
He stepped back.
You thought I was helping you.
But you were part of a plan, Grace.
One that still matters. And if you won't cooperate, then I'll take back everything.
Her voice was cold now. You're bluffing. David smirked. Am I?
He snapped his fingers.
Agat walket in, holding a laptop.
On the screen was a live feed of Elijah walking out of school.
Grace lunget forward. Don't touch him. David held up a hand. Relax. He's safe for now.
But I suggest you don't make this harder. I'll give you 48 hours to transfer back every cent of the original money.
Grace's voice broke. You gave it to me. No, he said.
I invested it in you. You were supposed to disappear.
Stay quiet. You came back.
Became a village hero. And now the wrong people are watching. I have enemies, Grace. I don't need them looking at you. He handed her a new envelope.
A-Plane Ticket. Instruktions. Bankdetails.
If I don't see the transfer in 48 hours.
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to.
Grace took the envelope and left. But as the doors closed behind her, she wasn't panicking.
She was planning. The turning point.
Grace didn't go straight home. She flew instead to Accra, where David's first wife still lived. The woman who had once sent Grace a letter full of rage and betrayal, then vanished from the headlines. Her name was Esther Owusu. When Grace arrived, Esther opened the door herself. She looked older, weary, but sharp-eyed. I knew you'd come, Esther said quietly. He's alive, isn't he?
Grace nodded.
And he's watching everything.
Esther exhaled. I have so meeting for you.
She led Grace to a small study, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a USB drive. These are documents.
Proof of David's offshore embezzlement. Shell companies. Fake death.
Even voice memos. I've waited 10 years for someone brave enough to bring him down. Grace stared at the drive like it was glowing.
VHY give it to me.
Esther's voice was steady. Because he took everything from both of us.
But you? You built so meeting.
He's afraid of you now. That's why he's lashing out. Grace closed her hand around the USB. He threatened my son. Esther's eyes narrowed. Then don't just fight back.
Finish him.
48 hours later, back in Tem village. The village was quiet.
Too quiet.
Grace stood on the rooftop of her guest house, eyes locked on the horizon. In her hand was a flash drive. The same one Esther Owusu had given her. It contained enough evidence to destroy David Owusu.
Bank accounts.
Stolen identities.
Tax evasion. Blackmail recordings.
Even a confession, audio files of him talking about fake plane crashes and bribed officials. But exposing him would mean war. And possibly, risking Elijah's life.
She had a choice to make.
And she was running out of time.
The kidnapping.
At exactly 10 a.m., her phone rang.
A blocked number.
She answered with a dry mouth. A mechanical voice spoke, "Elijah is safe.
For now.
If you value his life, you'll do as instructed. Deliver the account transfer confirmation by sunset."
No police. No lies. Then, click. The line went dead.
Grace dropped the phone and collapsed to her knees. She had kept her promises. Raised her children with dignity.
Built a school.
Lifted her village. She had done good.
And yet, here she was. Punished again. Threatened again. Because of a man who couldn't stand to lose control.
She wiped her tears and stood.
Not this time, she whispered. The secret team.
Grace didn't go to the bank. She went to Kwame, a childhood friend turned cybersecurity expert living in Kumasi. Quiet, loyal, and fiercely protective of Grace's family. She explained everything.
The fake death. The stolen identity. The threat.
Kwame leaned back and folded his arms.
Let me guess, he said.
The account is registered under a dead shell company based in Mauritius?
Grace blinked. Yes. He cracked a grin.
Then we can bury him.
The trap.
Using a copy of the flash drive, Kwame and his team created a false transfer receipt, perfectly real to the naked eye, but coded with malware that would breach David's hidden server when opened. Grace also contacted Esther, who had one more gift, a confidential contact in the Anti-Corruption Task Force of West Africa, a woman named Lieutenant Ao, known for taking down corrupt tycoons without fear. Together, they orchestrated a trap. Grace would meet David as instructed, alone, and pretend to hand over the confirmation. Meanwhile, Kwame's malware would activate, exposing all of David's offshore networks to the authorities.
But the plan had a flaw.
David was unpredictable. And Grace knew, he might not let Elijah go, even if she obeyed.
The final meeting, an abandoned warehouse outside Lagos. The sky was stormy. Thunder rumbled in the distance.
Grace arrived first.
A single overhead bulb flickered inside the warehouse.
Her heels echoed across the concrete floor. David stepped out from the shadows, flanked by 2 guards.
He looked amused. You look different, he said. Harder. I am, Grace replied.
Do you have it? She handed him a printed receipt.
Efrütingstere.
He took it, scanned it, smiled. I always knew you were smart. But obedient too.
Tatsache. She didn't speak.
Now, she said, where's my son? David whistled. Elijah was led in, blindfolded, gagged but unharmed. Grace's knees nearly gave out at the sight of him.
Let him go, she growled.
David snapped his fingers again. Elijah was shoved toward her. She ran, untied the blindfold, and pulled him into her arms.
He sobbed into her shoulder. You okay? She whispered. Ivy got you.
We're leaving. But just as she turned to go, David said,
One last thing. She froze. You disappear after this. Change your name. Again. I want no trace of you. You got your kit. You got your second chance.
But you don't get to haunt me, Grace.
She turned slowly, eyes like ice. Oh, David, Chesaid, I'm not haunting you. He blinked. What?
Suddenly, dozens of floodlights burst on, surrounding the warehouse. Out of the shadows came officers in tactical gear.
Lieutenant Ao stepped forward.
David Owusu, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and attempted kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent.
David's jaw dropped. What? He turned to Grace.
You did this?
She held Elijah tighter.
I told you once, David, never threaten my child. He lunged forward, but the officers tackled him. He screamed, spit, kicked, but it was over. David Owusu, the man who once controlled entire governments, was led away in handcuffs. Grace watched in silence.
No tears. No trembling. Just peace.
Epilogue, 1 year later. The village of Ntembe had changed.
The school was finished. The health center was expanded.
Grace had built a shelter for single mothers, named after her late grandmother.
Elia?
He now studied at one of the top science academies in the country, his tuition paid for by a scholarship program Grace herself had created. Miriam worked as the school's administrator. Kwame taught digital literacy to village youth. As for Grace, she never spoke publicly about what happened. She never mentioned David again. But in quiet moments, when the wind was soft and the world was still, she would look at Elijah and think.
He was born from chaos.
Raised in pain.
But through him, he found my voice.
Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't power.
It's peace.
And the girl who was once abandoned for being too poor to love had become the woman no one dared to forget.